Marvelous hello, friends and loved ones! With the release of the latest Stream Awards, I have officially done 10 top 10 video games of 20 style videos, or at least some sort of relevant equivalent. 2018. As such, I wanted to basically put together another short little video where I'm going to rank my top 10 number 1 games. Now, look, if you're new to this channel, or if this is somehow the first video of mine you've ever seen, this video probably isn't going to make much sense. It's just going to be a list of a bunch of games that really don't seem to have much in common with each other. So this is more of a deep dive for me, and all you lovely weirdos who have actually stuck with me over this past decade. I also want to be very clear that all of these games were, obviously at some point, Game of the Year material for me. So I'm not necessarily saying that any of these games are bad, or that number 7 is automatically a better game than number 8. I honestly took a lot of factors into consideration when putting this list together, like how likely am I to go back and play the game now, or if it would still hold that spot over another game with the gift of hindsight. If you like what I do, or you're a fan of any of these games, please consider commenting, subscribing, maybe even checking out the Patreon. It truly all helps me out a lot. So, yeah, let's go ahead and get things rolling. Starting off this list is a game that not only wouldn't have been the number 1 spot with the gift of hindsight, I'm pretty sure regular sight knew back then that Shin Megami Tensei 5 didn't deserve that title from me. Rewatching that old video, it was painfully clear that New Pokemon Snap was my true game of the year, and I only really gave it to SMT5 out of a combination of recency bias, elation that the long wait was finally over, and complete fanboyism that Atlas Senpai noticed me and gave me a code for the game. I still really liked SMT5, but my heart wasn't in it as much as I tried to say it was, and I can absolutely say that as an older, wiser, sleepier version of myself with a worse back. It's also this low because thanks to the release of the much better Shin Megami Tensei Vengeance last year, I'm really unlikely to ever go back to this original game unless I need some footage for videos. Like this one. King's Quest 2015 holds the distinct honor of being my very first game of the year, at least in video form, and therefore the first instance of me subverting all expectations people may have had for me that my lists might contain games that most normal people would expect from a Game of the Year video, something that'll be painfully obvious when we get to number 7. I'll admit it's a bit strange to have the game here because I actually did revisit this game a few years ago and even did a full video on it, and I clearly still had a good time with it. However, I acknowledge that the game was unfinished when I gave it that award in 2015, and I was basing it purely on a very strong first chapter and a substantially weaker second chapter. While most later chapters were still above average for me, I definitely don't feel the same level of wonder and joy about the full package that I did about that first chapter way back when. The thing is, I've looked back at that very old, so very old video to check what other games I included that year, but I'm not sure what games would have necessarily replaced King's Quest for me. Shovel Knight? Honey Pop? Box Boy? The world may never know. If we're going purely by hours played, you'd think that Animal Crossing New Horizons would be my game of the decade. I played this game, without exaggeration, every single day for nearly 3 years. I have absolutely zero quarrels about giving it my number 1 spot back then. I still think it deserves it as a 2020 title. I'm immensely thankful for everything this game gave me, from fond memories of playing with friends and family to letting me explore my creativity. There's a gorgeous museum that I still adore exploring, my awesome basement arcade, Aurora Borealis at this time of year, at this time of day, in this part of the country, localized entirely within my kitchen. I loved Animal Crossing New Horizons, and I will not apologize for any of that. But the thing is, once I stopped, I mean, just look at this mess. I don't want to have to be the one to clean this up. I'm not even the mayor anymore. As much as I loved and appreciated everything New Horizons did, I really just don't see myself ever getting back into it. I've got so much other stuff I want to play, and I feel like I've kinda done everything I wanted to with this title. At this point, I think the Switch successor getting a new entry in the series will really be the final nail that turns this into a game I never touch again. Sometimes you just have to accept that you can love something, but consider yourself utterly done with it. Some of you are probably surprised that this game wasn't back at number 10, but remember when I gave my 2023 Game of the Year award to Dangeresque the Rumisode Triungulant, an upgraded Homestar Runner point-and-click adventure game? Then, in 2024, I acknowledged that if I'd known about and played the Persona-inspired reverse tower defense coffee shop simulator Affogato, that it would have been my number 1 instead? Well, yeah, so that's why I have it so far back on this list. But I still don't regret my choice. I absolutely loved the Rumisode Triungulant, and it was a dang near perfect game for me that provided me with everything I needed and was looking for in a game back then. Sure, it may have gotten overshined by a game that I discovered and played after the fact, but it was still a great time, and one I probably will go back to at some point. In fact, I already went back to it for this video. I replayed the whole thing 100% just to get basically the same footage I already had again, as well as footage of all the 2024 DLC that was equally enjoyable. And I loved it. It's a great title. Bloomtown: A Different Story finds itself in a rather precarious position. If I put it too low on this list, it begs why it was even my number 1 game of 2024 in the first place, but if I put it too high, it raises suspicions of recency bias that I sorta touched on with SMT5. Obviously, I do love this game very much. I mean, this is the 3rd video in a row where I'm talking about it, but I don't really have that gift of hindsight yet because I don't think I've gotten much older or wiser to reflect upon my actions in just a few weeks. Though, hilariously enough, I did hurt my back. To overly simplify, this game is basically Stardew Valley meets Persona set in Gravity Falls, and oh man, did I love it! If you want to hear how much, I've got 2 other videos where I talked about it that you can check out, but for now, it just kinda hovers around the middle of this list, because, yeah, I think that's fair and a good spot for it. It's a great title, and I have 0 quarrels about making it my number 1 last year. Right in the middle of our list is Fire Emblem Three Houses, a game that I really don't have a lot to say about. I definitely remember really liking it when it came out. The cast and setting are among my favorites in the series, especially S-tier waifu Manuela. I even played the side game Midquill Three Hopes, which, if some of you may recall, didn't make it into my top 10 at all that year, but whatever. I like Three Houses, but it's not a game I've gone back to that often, except for wanting to do a playthrough where I specifically went gay for Yuri because, I mean, just look at him. Yeah, it's a good SRPG, it's a good Fire Emblem game, it's a good Game of the Year option for me, it's a good middle-of-the-list pick. A solid Game of the Year for me that I enjoyed and probably would still enjoy if I went back to it, but that's really about all I have to say. 2018 was an odd one because it was the only year where I didn't specifically do a top 10 games of 2018 list. Instead, I just talked about 10 indie games I'd played since I spent most of that year overseas and I wasn't playing a lot of the titles that I'd wanted to. However, 2018 was also the year I finally got into the Yakuza series with Kiwami and Zero, and I do recall giving Kiwami 2 the honorary title of my Game of the Year that I hadn't played yet. Well, obviously I did make my way back to the States and eventually played Yakuza Kiwami 2, and yeah, it would have been my Game of the Year that year if I'd played it. I was riding high on the series, and I did enjoy the story of Yakuza 2, with Ryuji really standing out to me as a character. Kamurocho was still pretty new and exciting to me back then, and it's a series I still adore to this day, with some of you recalling that Infinite Wealth scored very high on my 2024 best games list, and the quickly approaching Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii is likely to make my list this year too. Even diving back into Kiwami 2 to record stuff for this video, I ended up getting way more footage than I needed because I was just having a great time. I briefly debated the positioning of these next 2 entries, but ultimately I decided to put 2017's Persona 5 at the number 3 spot, because much like with SMT5 all the way back at number 10, I just don't revisit Persona 5 much since Royal came out, unless I need specific footage for a video or something. But I can't stress enough how much I love and adore Persona 5. It's legitimately one of my favorites in the series. The Phantom Thieves are probably my favorite collective cast, definitely so if you take the side games into consideration, and it stands out to me as one of my favorite RPGs of the past decade. Crazy to think that it's almost been a decade since this game came out, with hardly a peep about Persona 6, a game that's certainly likely to show up on future lists from me. Persona 5 is such an amazing game. It's been a huge part of not just my personal life, but on this very channel. I love this game, and I don't think any other title from 2017, which was a solid year for gaming, even came close to topping this one for me. What else is there for me to say? It's Persona 5. I adore this game, even if, yeah, I'm still gonna play Royal when I want to get my fix for it. Now, technically, I gave my 2016 Game of the Year award to Ace Attorney Spirit of Justice on the 3DS. However, if I'm gonna play this game again, it's gonna be on the Switch as part of the Apollo Justice trilogy. But unlike Persona 5 and Royal, the Switch port of this game is really just more of a port rather than a changed or enhanced version. I've said it before, and I'll say it again right now, Ace Attorney is my favorite video game franchise, so naturally the one time it won my Game of the Year spot was gonna rank pretty high on this list as well. I actually really liked most of the cases in this game. It was fun exploring the justice system of Kurain. The civil trial where Apollo and Phoenix actually butted heads was pretty cool. And I even loved the Athena trial with the hot clown girl, even if I think Simon should have been the prosecutor on that one. It would have created a much more engaging dynamic between them. Truthfully, one of the main things potentially holding Spirit of Justice back from being my number one on this list is, as much as I love this franchise, in hindsight, I'm not entirely sure that it still holds firm as my favorite game from 2016, because simply put, look, if I'd played Stardew Valley back then, like, with the way I do my rules, that game was never eligible for my yearly rankings, but yeah, if I'd played that in 2016, it probably would have taken this spot. And longtime viewers may have seen this one coming, but Triangle Strategy. You know why this game is my number one pick? Why it is my number one game? Because it truly is the only title on this list with absolutely no conditionals attached to it. I can't think of a single other game from 2022 that comes even close to dethroning this one. There's no enhanced edition I find myself wanting to play instead if I'm gonna revisit it, and that's just it. I absolutely could and would revisit it. I am a big fan of strategy RPGs. I loved nearly every character you can recruit and the events where you get to know them better. The scale mechanic stands out as one of my favorite decision-making mechanics in video game history, and it's an absolutely gorgeous game with a great soundtrack and top-notch writing. Triangle Strategy is just an absolutely stellar, phenomenal SRPG that stands as one of my favorite games of all time, much less limited to a list of my top 10 number ones from across the last decade. The name is still really dumb though, I'm not gonna let that go. Alright, and that's my top 10 number one games. I have to say, it's really interesting to see how your own tastes and preferences can shift over the years. A large chunk of these games may not have held the title that they did back then if I'd played other games or even just been in a different mood while I was making the videos. It's honestly amazing to me to think that I've been doing these for 10 years now, and I'm just so incredibly thankful to all of you that have stuck around, whether it's watching my old stuff or just getting to this part of the video. Thank you for giving me the chance to do what I do, and please, let me know what some of your number one games have been over the past decade. I'd love to hear about them. That's going to do it for me for now. I'm going to take a small break because I have done some big videos over these past few weeks. But until next time, thanks again, and take care.